Okay, so when I heard about the theme from Africa to America and then that extension, the first thing I thought of was Maya Angelou and Still I Rise. However, I could not take that title. So here it is, and still I survived. Human capital kidnapped first by the Portuguese, America following suit, bringing mineral rich kingdoms to their knees, shackled, chained, whipped, forced on the Juno, Mali, and volunteer was the last thing proud kings, queens, chiefs, and warrior braves did. Snatched from a land of diamonds and gold, highly revered, and still I survived. Shipped as packaged meat crammed in thigh to thigh inside a dark wooden damp cave stored away to be bought, sold, and exploited in America as cotton, sugar, and tobacco, picking slaves, and still I survived. Plantation life is not for the faint of heart. Ancestral courage beaten from memory right from the start. Bondage breaking a willingness to be defiant. Resistance crumbling into compliance. Forbidden to read, understand the words of the oppressor, to breathe. Susan King Taylor, the first Black teacher, taught the strange printed mysteries. Forbidden to leave without a note signaling permission, ensuring unchallenged obedience, total submission, and still I survived. Forbidden cultural drums, Chick Webb embodied the spirit of drumming rhythm, vibrating through snares, powerful beats, sweet as the taming of a wild mare. Forbidden to excel, tortured dreams, daily nightmares. W.E.B. Du Bois and Frederick Douglass, once America's slaves, becoming authors, activists, academics, historical figures, defying odds in the home of the brave. Forbidden to own land, create businesses, enjoy the pride of entrepreneurship, threats, bombings, cross burnings, constant deterrence. Sarah Breed, Love Walker, tackle stifling laws and restrictions, becoming the first Black female entrepreneur, a millionaire, removing the shackles of unfounded intellectual depictions, and still I survived. Through slavery meant to dehumanize us, lynchings meant to terrify us, Jim Crow laws meant to defeat us, unlawful imprisonment meant to quiet us, assassination of leaders meant to stop us, segregation meant to deter us, redlining meant to confine us, railroad tracks and freeways meant to divide us, misleading biblical teachings meant to control us, false narratives meant to confound us, ongoing racism and discrimination meant to remind us that the fight still rages on. Even with a former president with the audacity of hope to unite us, political leaders standing their ground to empower us to retain the Voting Rights Acts of 1965, as the legislators, naively oblivious to the storms brewing to destroy all of us, gleefully blows the dust off shackles, whips, and chains to return us to the new Jim Crow intended to re-enslave us. And still, I'll survive, as there is nothing new anyone can throw at us. Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Jay. Hey, Jay, when you and Christine have your tag team show touring around the country, don't forget us little people, okay? Wonderful, wonderful. Bringing the heat again. Thank you, and thank you, Christine. So now we're going to transition to our awesome panel that we have, as well as my co-host, Tamara Howie. Quickly, I just wanted to introduce introduce our panelists. And of course, this won't do their awesome work justice. We have joining us today Judge Anita Crawford-Willis of Seattle Municipal Court. Judge Crawford-Willis was appointed to Seattle Municipal Court bench in 2017 after nearly 30 years in public service as a public defender, judge pro tem, and administrative law judge. Judge Crawford-Willis is a native of Seattle and grew up in the Central District. Both parents were proud members of the Machinists Union, IAM 751, and worked on the Boeing production line for 35 years. Our next panelists will include Mr. Nicholas Brown, a U.S. attorney for the Western District of Washington. Nicholas Brown has deep roots in the Justice Department, having served from 2007 to 2013 as an assistant United States attorney in Western Washington, handling a variety of criminal cases. And from 2013 to 2017, Mr. Brown served as general counsel to Governor Jay Inslee. And in that role, he was involved in critical issues, including high priority litigation, criminal justice policy, tribal gaming and Indian law, and clemency petitions. And then finally, to round out our awesome panel, we have Mr. Craig Sims of counsel for Schroeder, Goldmark, and Bender. Mr. Sims is an accomplished trial attorney with over 20 years of litigation and leadership experience. His calling to be of service to others is what drew him to Schroeder, Goldmark, and Bender. Mr. Sims' focus is to seek accountability while honoring the lives of his clients and their families. And Tamara, I will turn it over to you. Thank you to our wonderful guests for joining us here today.
Thank you, and thank you, Naja, for the introduction. So I know that a lot of us are at least familiar with our distinguished panelists and their big accomplishments. So before we get started, I want to have a little fun and help us to relax. And I think that will help us feel like we're amongst friends, and it will set the foundation for a good conversation. So I'm going to start with the icebreaker. And actually, before I go into the icebreaker, for the audience, if you do have questions for our panelists, please put them in the chat box and Naja will collect them and we will have a Q&A at the end of the session. All right, so going to our rapid fire questions, I want to make sure that I know a little bit about you that is kind of stuff that fun facts that people might not know. And so I'm going to say we should start, let's just say alphabetical order with Mr. Brown answering, followed by Judge Crawford-Willis, and then Mr. Sims.
I think you want to go in reverse alphabetical order.
Pardon me?
So I think you want to go in reverse alphabetical order.
Reverse alphabetical order.
I'm just teasing you. I'll go.
I'm already nervous. Okay. So, okay, let me pull up my questions. All right. So first, what was your first job? Starting with Mr. Brown.
My first of all, thank you, everyone. It's great to be here. It's great to be with these two panelists. Appreciate the opportunity. My first job, full-time job, or part-time, I should say, was at Taco Bell when I was at 16, and it was a very important job.
Okay, and Judge Crawford-Willis.
Yes, hi, Tammy. I too want to get my thank yous in first to the organizers for inviting me, Tammy, Naja, Judge McCullough, a longtime mentor, Tammy, one of my babies, and to the esteemed panelists. Oh my gosh, I'm like, how did I get to be a part of this group? And Nick, to express my congratulations again. We're so proud of you, our community. And Craig, you know, we continue to be proud of you, everything you do. So now that I got that out of the way, my first job, actually kind of two-part. I started at Lucky's grocery store as a bag girl. And then shortly after, I became a cashier at Jack in the Box, which is now, if you're familiar with the Central District, where Ike's is, that was Jack in the Box. And that was really my first job.
Okay.
Hey, and good afternoon, everyone. Also expressing my sentiments of gratitude to echo the first two panelists. It's an amazing opportunity to be here and to have this conversation. My first job was an unpaid job, and it was doing chores around my house at the direction of my supervisor, my mother, Victoria Sims. My first paid job was in middle school, and I delivered newspapers for the Chicago Tribune. And so that was first paid and unpaid job.
Well, you know, I've already learned that most of the panel, except for you, Mr. Sims, has the fast food experience. And my first job was at Jack in the Box too, Judge Crawford-Willis in Kent. That one is still at the top of the hill in Kent. So, okay, the next question, this may be a hard one. What's your favorite restaurant in Seattle? And we'll still go in the same order.
First thing that came to mind was Revel. It's a Korean restaurant in Fremont.
So fancy restaurant is the Palisade. Neighborhood restaurant is Blue Water.
And for me, I gotta go with Island Soul with that cornbread with the coconut flakes in it. It'll get me better than that.
Okay. All right. So these are the next ones are going to be kind of like a this or that. So would you prefer a night in or a night out?
At this stage, after 2 years of COVID, night out.
That's a hard one. I'm gonna say a night in with my husband and my daughter is nothing's better than that.
Yeah, and I'm also a night in as well. You know, I spend so much time interacting with people day in and day out. Sometimes I like to sit home and just be quiet for a minute.
Okay. Beach vacation or city vacation?
Beach.
Definitely the beach.
City all day. I need to go shopping. I need to walk around and see the grit of where I'm at. My wife enjoys sitting there at the beach and reading a book, and that doesn't do anything for me. I need to be out doing stuff.
I agree.
City all day.
Would you rather travel to the past or travel to the future?
Future.
Future, I tend to be kind of nosy. I want to know what's going to happen.
Past, because I'm scared of what the future may hold. So I want to, sometimes I don't want to know. Ignorance is bliss, so they say. So for me, it's the past and be able to have conversations with folks that came before me.
All right, and this is the last question. And so keeping in mind the theme of this event, if you could sit down and have dinner with anyone from the past, who would it be?
I'll keep it family. My great grandfather, who I never had a chance to meet.
I would have to say to one of my ancestors, whether it be a great grandmother or ancestor.
And my immediate reaction was my grandfather, who passed away when I was just a handful of years old. I never had an opportunity to meet him, but heard amazing stories about him. So that's what I want to go to Island Soul with, and then walk around the city on our vacation.
Okay.
I'm bringing it all back, Tamara. Bring it all back.
Well, now that we're done with that part, I feel relaxed. I feel like we set the foundation for a good conversation. I feel like I'm amongst friends, and we're gonna get into some more in-depth questions. All right. So this first one is for everyone, and we can just keep the same order. But the question is, what drew you to your career in the law, and what drives you moving forward?
So I have both a sort of practical and aspirational answers to that. I mean, when I was in college, I went to Morehouse College on an Army ROTC scholarship, which meant I had to serve active duty when I graduated from college. But I wasn't really interested in going into the regular service. And I started thinking more and more about the best way that I wanted to serve. And so I decided I wanted to go to law school so I could serve my military career as a JAG. And that was just very practical. I didn't have a calling to the law at that age. Hadn't aspired to be a lawyer. But as soon as I got into a courtroom and started working with clients, representing people, I really just fell in love with that and fell in love with being a public servant in that regard, and found that was the best place for me to serve and pursue a profession.
So I'm sure some of you have heard my story, but as a young child, I always had a deep desire to do something to make a difference in the lives of others. And I always had a strong sense of, I wanted people to be treated fairly. I didn't like when people weren't treated fairly. And so, of course, I didn't know anything about lawyers, not coming from, family that had any lawyers, a part of the family, first generation college, all of those things. But my dad took me to, I have a cousin who was always getting in trouble with the law. So we went to his court case so that he could have some family there to support him. And as I watched his lawyer, who was a public defender, defending him, I was just mesmerized by that. And I thought, that is what I want to do, not really understanding what that really was, but it just spoke to me. And so as a young person, I had that dream, and because of my family and other people helped me, I was able to achieve that dream and have my dream job as a public defender with the Defender Association. And I found that to be very rewarding. Never really thought about being a judge. I just thought all it was that I would be a public defender and represent people and be a voice and advocate for people who couldn't speak for themselves. It wasn't until two judges, really, two women, saw something in me that I didn't see and said to me, one was a Latino judge, the other was an African-American woman. They both said, you should think about being judges. I actually pulled myself and Council President Deborah Juarez to the side and told us that we should think about being judges because we were great advocates, and that's something that we should consider. And so that was the first time I thought about that, and made my way to be an administrative law judge and eventually to the bench. What drives me moving forward really are those same desires that I had as a child to make a difference in the lives of people. In my courtroom, I try to make sure that people feel heard, that they feel respected, that I lead with compassion. And so really the same things that motivated me as a child continue to drive me forward today.
All right, and Tamara, since we're amongst family, I'll just be 100% real with you. So my journey to being a trial lawyer started when I was 4 years old, standing in front of the congregation of Greater Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church on an Easter Sunday. And I was dressed in a three-piece burgundy suit with a vest. And I gave a speech. I did not come here to stay. I just came but to say, have a happy Easter day. And it was at that point that people told me that they saw something in me, even as a young child, where I was meant to do something and give speeches. I didn't know what that meant. But then as I transitioned in my life, and in sixth grade, I remember the moment when I was in front of the television. We had one TV in my household, and whatever my mom watched is what we watched. So it was Days of Our Lives, Young and the Restless, but she also watched this show called Perry Mason, old school black and white. And I remember one particular day, there was a courtroom drama scene going on, and I was sitting in front of the TV with my cousin, Michelle, and it was something about what was going on at that moment where I told my cousin, that's going to be what I do. I'm going to be in trial doing something. I didn't know at that moment what that meant because I didn't know any lawyers, didn't know anything about law school or the path to get there, but I knew that's what I was meant to do. And then throughout my life, one thing led to the next, it led to the next, it ultimately allowed me an opportunity to do trial work. And what continues to drive me now, if we're being honest with you, is fear. Fear of failure is what continues to drive me. And I say that because when I headed down this path, I was the first in my family, to the roots of my family tree, to go this route. And people, even when I went to law school, for better or for worse, my family put me on this pedestal where they held me out as, okay, this is one of the shining stars in our family. And I have a large family. And it was a fear of failing them because they put me out there. And that's continually what drives me, is failure. And I don't want to let anyone down, specifically my family. who they believe in me and they see me as a leader in the family. I just can't let them down. So that's what continues to drive me to do what I do, and also to be able to provide the service that I believe is a calling to me in my life to do the work that I do.
So
Hey, Tamara, I'm going to ask Craig to circulate a picture of him in his suit after this is all over for everyone to appreciate.
Slow down, because you might just get one.
So, Mr. Sims, as you were talking, I was thinking about how you said that you had got up on Easter Sunday and you said some words, and so people were started pouring into you what they thought you might be capable of, and how important it is that we plant seeds, like in the spirit of, like, especially Black excellence, that we plant seeds in our youth. I know for me, I went to Seattle U School of Law, and both you, Mr. Sims, and Judge Crawford-Willis were always a presence there. And even at that time, even though I was an adult in school, it was still important and useful to have someone kind of pour in you to help you realize, your dreams or your vision and just opportunities for you.
That's right.
So,
and to be clear, my words just weren't some words, Tamara. They were impactful. It was an impactful speech. So let me clarify that. But to your point, and the beauty of what we're doing here and having this conversation, as I look at the screen, is I look at Judge McCullough, who swore me in as a lawyer. He and the late Judge Fred Bonner swore me and a few other individuals in as a lawyer. And Judge McCullough pouring into me as a young lawyer, not knowing me, but demanding of me excellence, and demanding of me and many of us the expectation of continuing to contribute, to continuing to look out and provide mentorship. And every time, and I think that Judge Crawford-Willis and Mr. Brown, you can agree that every time Judge McCullough calls, he's going to ask you to do something. And you just know that's just expectation. And Mr. Bullock, I see you laughing, so you know what I'm talking about. And many others on this call can appreciate that. But that's just what we do to the generation to the next, to hold us accountable and to make sure that if you're entering into this field, that you are nothing short of being excellent. And so even as Ms. Conway has confirmed that same expectation is placed upon her, we don't want to fail Judge McCullough, who has opened up doors for us, and many others who have opened up doors for us. Judge Anita Crawford-Willis, who's poured into many of us, some of us even before we became lawyers, she has so many babies out here who are 40, 50 years old, but she still looks at them as their babies, right? Demanding of us that we are excellent in everything that we do. So as I talked about the expectations, not wanting to fail my family, that also extends to the likes of Judge McCullough, Judge Anita Crawford-Willis, and many others who have helped me get to where I'm at now.
Fun fact, Judge McCullough swore me in too as well. I guess he swears in everybody.
And fun fact is Judge McCullough got to swear in my babies because I wasn't able to yet. So he was always my go-to until I was able to swear them in myself.
Yes, Judge Crawford-Willis made that happen for us. So I was grateful. And so, Mr. Sims, I did hear a little bit about, I guess, how Black excellence kind of trickles down and the impacts of it. I'd like to hear from the other panelists, Mr. Brown and then Judge Crawford-Willis, about what Black excellence means to you.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, I think all of us, as Craig said, could echo a lot about the people here in this community that have had an impact on us. But it's also really important for me to have been able to look to people who I hadn't met and how much representation can impact an individual's life. And I remember when I was a relatively new AUSA, Assistant U.S. Attorney in this office that I now am leading, and when President Obama was elected and former Attorney General Holder was appointed, when they put those people's pictures on the wall in the hallway, every federal government office has the president and whomever the agency head. And when they put President Obama's picture on the wall and AG Holder, I really stopped and paused, and it took my breath away. I had been serving my country as an Army officer. I had been with the Department of Justice, but it was the first time in my life where I had the chance to report directly to Black leadership at that level. And it gave me hope and a vision of what was possible. And, you know, I obviously had not met the president or the attorney general and thought at that point I never would. But just seeing people in those positions can really, really change the trajectory of people's lives by just giving them something to aspire. What's important to me now that I'm having an opportunity to lead an office, particularly one that works on criminal justice issues, is to make sure that representation is not just representation, but it also brings different perspectives. It brings different connections to the community, and it really can help shift the trajectory of these really important systems that really impact our communities. So it's good to be the first, but it's also good to look and see what other bridges we can build so there are seconds and thirds in an entire community. So, you know, a generation from now, people can be talking about Craig and myself and others like they talk about Judge McCullough. For me, it's Judge Richard Jones in the federal courthouse, those types of individuals that I've looked to for so much of my career.
So, you know, of course, Black excellence has to do with the way that we do our work, that we want to make sure we're doing our work with excellence, but it's so much more than that. It's making sure, like everyone has said on here, that we are reaching back and bringing up others behind us, and that we are giving them the tools they need to do their work with excellence, to go above and beyond where we've gone. And so to me, that is so important. I mean, we don't, it's not just something that we do casually. It is something that we have to do. I believe like it is our obligation to do that and to make sure the next generations, you know, that Craig's daughter and my daughter and your daughter, that they have these opportunities to do the things they need to do. So it's much more than just the actual work that we do. It's the work that we do to bring the community with us, the work. And Craig, I'm with you about not wanting to disappoint, you know, the people that have gone before us and that shoulders we stand on. I mean, I think about, you know, people like Judge McCullough, Judge Haley, who swore me in, the late Judge Haley, and Judge Johnson, you know, like our godfather, always wanting to make sure we make them proud. I mean, that is really something too that I think about. You know, we don't want to let them, and even for my babies, I want to make sure that I'm making them proud. I want to be an example to them and make them proud and say, okay, this is how Judge Anita does it. We got to get, you know, do even better. But I mean, Black excellence encompasses a lot.
If I can interject real quick, Tamara. Nick, you said something that I'm going to specifically ask you to follow up on. You made a statement where you said it is good to be the first. And I think all of us on this call, in some respects or another, are the first to do something. You as the first Black man or Black individual to serve in the position where you're at. Me being the first Black person to do something in my career, and Judge Crawford-Willis the same. Can you, just so people can have an appreciation for it, can you talk about, although it's good to be the first, it's also hard to be the first, and talk about that, right? If we're having a very real conversation, can you speak to that? And pardon me for my interrupting, Tamara.
It's hard in a sort of couple different facets. One, at least for me personally, as you've indicated a little bit, Craig, the expectations that come with being the first and what that can mean for the community, what that can mean for people that you've never met. You know, obviously, as Craig and others have said, we all have had family supporting and lifting us up and telling us that we could do things that we didn't think were achievable. And so you feel that pressure. But when you become the first, particularly in a public position, at least for me, you start to hear more buy-in and appreciation from people that you haven't met, you know, people from the community that are looking to you with aspiration and with hope that things will be different because you are the first. And that's an immense amount of pressure that can distract you from just doing your job and doing it well and making sure you excel in those positions. You know, being the first African-American Black man in a law enforcement position is for me very specifically a challenge, because I am dealing with a system that is putting tons of Black and brown people in prison. I am dealing with law enforcement officers who are coming from outright biased positions quite often, and antiquated language about how they think about the issues affecting our community. And I feel this immense burden as the U.S. attorney and as the first Black U.S. attorney to try to change and correct and call out that behavior with people that I have to partner with and work with and rely on to do my job as U.S. attorney effectively. And there's just so many nuanced layers there that come with that burden and with that role as being the first that other people in this position have not had to face in the same way that I have. It's an honor and a pleasure to have this job every day. I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be at the exact right time. But there are these different layers that lay on to the work that I do every day because I am the first Black man in this role.
And with that, I wonder, Mr. Brown, what do you think are some important changes that should be or could be made, need to be made perhaps, to make your profession or current position more accessible for people of color, specifically Black folks, if there's a lack of that?
Do you mean a lack of Black folks coming into work for me, or how?
Or just opportunities in your position or in that
Sure.
role for, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, this office, the U.S. Attorney's Office, certainly here in this district, but across the country, have suffered for years with a lack of diversity and representation. We've gotten tremendously better in that regard, but we have a lot more work to do. And I think the challenge right now has increased for all sorts of legitimate reasons. People are not interested in being prosecutors, are not interested in working with law enforcement communities, are not interested in being part of a system that has had these tremendously adverse and negative effects on our communities. And I recognize that. And I think in the last 4 years too, there was a lot of skepticism broadly about, the Department of Justice. I think sort of historically, the Department of Justice being a tremendous instrument of good for communities of color, on the leading edge as a government agency of change and bringing the right sorts of lawsuits to bring about change for everyone. And so historically, the Department of Justice was a tremendous place to be and a tremendous sort of opportunity of hope, but that has changed a great deal. But for my money, and as I think about it, I am at the table every day making decisions on policy, on charging decisions, on the culture here and how we think about our work. And I would not have that impact if I was on the sidelines. And so I think if people and young lawyers or law students as are thinking about how they want to change and affect their community, you better be at the table. You better be in the room with a voice. I think to really bring about holistic change, you need people at the table and you need people in the community advocating for change and pushing leaders in public positions. But if you can't just have one or the other. And for me, where I found my voice was being at the table and trying to be engaged and make decisions. And whether that's in a position like I have as an appointed position or elected position, or just being a staff member in these public agencies and these public offices and shifting and shaping the expectations of the people who are making these decisions, this is really, really important.
And Mr. Sims, I'd ask you the same thing. I mean, you're at a firm, and I know when I graduated law school, it was to go into a firm was very hard. I mean, most of, my class, it was rare. So what would you say would be some changes that need to be made for more people of color to have access to working in law firms?
And so for me in my career, I started off in the public sector as a county prosecutor, and am now several years into private practice. And I think most of it is providing people with information and opportunities. And I've had many conversations with lawyers of many different, from many different cultures, races, creeds, nations of origins, and explaining to them and dispelling a lot of fears of what private practice is really all about. Now, as with any office, each firm or private entity has a respective personality to its own firm, and some are better fits than others. But I think it's more so just a matter of folks reaching out, as I've done many times and many others as well, have reached out to students just to let them know, here's what private practice really is about. Here's what the business of the practice of law is really all about, and dispelling a number of notions, or educating them so they can be informed and seek those opportunities.
Okay, thank you. And Judge Crawford-Willis, I have a question for you. I'm going to pivot this conversation a little bit. As a Black woman and a judge, what are your thoughts about President Biden indicating that his nominee will likely be a Black woman?
So this just brings, just the thought of it brings so many emotions and feelings to me, just the thought of it. I mean, having a woman, a Black woman serve on the top court would be amazing. Just thinking how we generally tend to be at the bottom of everything, at the back of the line for everything, how we have to prove ourselves every day. We have to fight the feelings of, you know, you're not supposed to be here, you're not good enough to be here. We try to make sure we cross every T, dot every I, feel that we can't make a mistake. And this would just be like a feeling of vindication and celebration, and like the ultimate breaking of the glass ceiling. It's just very emotional for me at the thought of it. And just to think, to have somebody that looks like me to serve on the top court. I mean, I think about my daughter, Craig's daughter, your daughter, all these young girls coming up, to see this Black woman serving there. And it gives me hope that they will know they can achieve anything. I mean, nothing is impossible for them. I'm thinking about, like, if I had seen a Black woman in the Supreme Court when I was a little girl, I mean, what could that have done for me? What different choices would I have made? What would I have thought was even more possible? So I'm just really really emotional for me. And I think for all women and women of color, it should be a celebration. I mean, just as we celebrated the previous justices that were women, you know, Ruth Bader and Sandra Day, and of course we love Justice Sotomayor. This is a celebration for all of us, and it should be a celebration for our country. I mean, it should signal that we have decided, yes, we need to include everybody, needs to be at the table and be participating. We need to celebrate the fact that this Black woman, this brilliant Black woman that comes, will bring a lens that the Supreme Court has been missing all these years. And so I'm just very excited about it, and very emotional about it, as I'm sure you can tell. And so I just think it would be wonderful.
And Tamara, if I could, as a follow-up to Judge Crawford-Willis, so in the direct impact for me is that my 10-year-old daughter, Brooklyn, she's watching these things. And I think about also the generational impact that it would have. And specifically what I'm thinking about is when in Washington State Supreme Court, Justice Helen Whitener was appointed as a Supreme Court justice. That's somewhat, she was a couple of years behind me in law school, so I've known her for years. And so immediately I called her and I put Brooklyn in touch with Justice Whitener. And they had an interview, it was recorded, it was great. And now Justice Whitener asks about Brooklyn all the time and talks to her. And so now my 10-year-old daughter, Brooklyn, has a relationship with a Washington State Supreme Court justice. Who would have thought of that? Who would have thought that that's possible? And now that's her new normal. Hey, Dad, can we call Justice Whitener tomorrow? I just want to ask her a couple of questions. Yeah, okay, we can. And she'll answer the phone. And so now in terms of what is possible, to follow up with Judge Crawford-Willis, now that is possible. That's her normal, where it wasn't our respective normal. And so if you see now, if she's able to see someone that looks like her on the United States Supreme Court bench, that becomes her normal. And it sets her sights on places where we could never have even imagined And so I see that more of as the personal impact that it has on me, my immediate family, and future generations of young women, regardless of their color, because it opens up so many possibilities for them. So I just wanted to add that. So thank you, Judge Crawford-Willis, for opening up that avenue.
Yes, I mean, I just can't say enough. I mean, your theme about from Africa to, I mean, our ancestors could we are their wildest, that is their wildest dreams, that we would go to every height. And so it's just so exciting.
Representation does matter, that's for sure. That's for sure. So I'm gonna ask this next question about the 15th Amendment. And we all know that it protects our right to vote. Congress is given the power to enforce this from adverse legislation that seeks to deny or abridge it. What are your concerns, or what are your thoughts about the various state bills to restrict voting access? And do they raise concerns for you in light of the 15th Amendment? And I will start with Mr. Sims.
Does it raise concerns? Yes. And the challenge I have is answering your question with specificity, because I don't know all the different laws that are being presented in different states. But what I do know is this: from talking to those that have come before me, I have an appreciation for the power of the right to vote. And I still find it offensive that every so often there needs to be the passage of the Voting Rights Act that started, I believe, in 1965, if my memory serves correct. And the fact that that still needs to be addressed and that it's even still an issue is offensive to me. And what I also know in some of the research that I've done specific to the respective states, they're essentially trying to do all that they can to limit access to the right to vote. In some of these states, there's been criminal statutes that have been presented that would make it a crime for people to hand out snacks while individuals are waiting in line to vote. I think that's in Georgia, if my memory serves correct. So the fact that there are these things that are intentionally meant to try and limit individuals' right to vote is offensive to me. And I see that as we are the ones that are the face of our community, we have to do something about it. And what that is, I don't know just yet. But what I do know is that is a part of our commitment to our community as Black lawyers and as being excellent Black lawyers and striving for excellence. And as we talk about from Africa to America and where we are now, in my story, as I understand it, and it's been presented to me from my families from Mississippi to Seattle, and think about all the challenges that have come throughout the generations of my family. And so now I feel compelled, for better or for worse, right or wrong, to advocate and use my position of where I'm at to try and address many of these things, as many as I can, because I'm only one human being and we only have so much time on this earth. But it's definitely, I feel compelled to do everything that I can to help address these matters. But that's what I know at this moment. I don't want to take up too much time, so I'll pass it off to Mr. Brown.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, first and foremost, as in my role, I can't comment on specific legislation, but let me just say that any effort to limit the right to vote is a travesty. I just finished a wonderful biography on John Lewis, written by Meacham, a reporter on MSNBC, and think about all of the sacrifice that John Lewis and others of his generation had to be able to register to vote, to be able to exercise their right as citizens of this country. And as I look across the nation and see all these efforts, it's an embarrassment. I mean, it really is a true attack on our democracy, and it's an emergency of the type that I don't think we talk about as being an emergency. I mean, these days there's a myriad of issues we can focus on, but attacking the right to vote is one of the most prominent threats to our democracy. And I think we should talk about it and think about it in that way. The other thing that I would add is that, what it also hones into me is how important it is to be engaged as a citizen and as a voter in your communities and in your state. Too many of us, and I was like this for a very long time, are focused on what's happening in DC and Congress or not happening in Congress. And we forget, as Washingtonians here, 90% of the things we care about is happening in Olympia. Our schools, our safety, our education, our traffic, our transportation, all these things that affect our day-to-day lives, our right to vote, are made by decision makers for the most part in our state and local governments. And we as citizens don't pay nearly enough attention to that. Most of us could name, our president and senator, but could not name our state representative, our state senator, or our city council person. And we need to engage there, because these bills are not being passed in Congress. They're being passed in all these state legislatures. And we don't pay attention to that. And so that would be my call to action. To Craig's point, it's hard to figure out where you can engage on this, but we need to pay attention to what happens in our hometowns, in our home communities, and forget about DC a little bit.
Okay. I like to say that I recently visited the Mississippi Museum of Civil Rights. It was amazing. I recommend everyone do it. They had so much history, and when you go view something like that and you see that all of the people who came before you, how they fought, I'm sorry, it went dark in here, how they fought for you to have this right and for that right to be infringed upon, possibly, or challenged. It's disheartening. So.
And just to piggyback on what they said, what both Craig and Nick said, it is very telling. I mean, it's a sad commentary on our country to see that this is still going on, and the things that people are doing, as petty as Craig mentioned, trying to pass a law that you can't give out snacks. So I would agree, we need to be doing what we can within our own sphere of influence. It may not be a big thing, but we all need to be doing our part. But it shows the state of our country.
Thank you for that. So we do have more questions, but it looks like the audience has quite a few questions. So I am going to hand it over to Naja, who will.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
So the first question that we have from the audience is, as we sit around the table of honesty and integrity, as the first, which I think Mr. Sims and both Mr. Brown, or maybe all our panelists spoke upon this, as the first, other than the burden you feel, what are some real life situations you faced as an African American as you climbed into your position? And that's for the panel.
I mean, I think we could all tell stories of incidences of discrimination and bias and skepticism about us and our rules. I mean, I think any Black lawyer across the country has faced some of those things. And I think even more so here in Seattle, where there just aren't as many Black lawyers in any sort of public sector, private sector, the courthouse, what have you. Confusion about your role in a courtroom when you're there as a lawyer, bias from the bench, from your colleagues. When I was previously an AUSA in this office, I think at the time, for most of my time, I was one of two Black lawyers here. For a period, I was the only Black lawyer here, but there was another person who worked here who was Indian, who had a very, very different name than I did. He was about my age, about my height, but we looked differently. And his name was long and expansive, and mine is Nick Brown for short. And we would often get confused by judges, by opposing counsel, who would email me about a case that I was not on and my colleague was on, and sometimes by our coworkers. And the first time that something like that happens, you can kind of chuckle and brush it off. But when it happens repeatedly from people that you respect and work with, you start really to question how they view you and how they view you as a party or as a coworker. When I would get an email intended for a colleague that wasn't me, I just sort of would work through the practical, which meant that individual was sitting down and thinking about a case and like thinking about who was on the other side of that case, and they go, oh, it's the other Brown guy. You know, like that's the only way you would type Nick Brown and not this long Indian name if you weren't taking the time to distinguish between the, you know, very few people of color here. And that, you know, at first you laugh and then you get sad and then you get angry. And you know, those sorts of pressures and things that you deal with as a practitioner are just not the types of things that white lawyers have to deal with ever, you know. And so you think about that burden and that additional challenge of just trying to do your job and to do it well with excellence. You know, I think all of us in this community would have stories similar to that.
And for me, I'll take it a different direction. I agree 1,000% with what Nick just talked about. But for me, I think it was more so a struggle for me to believe that I belonged there. Because I was the first ever to do something. I was the first criminal division chief of the Seattle City Attorney's Office. And it was a big role, never had it before. I ultimately found out that I could do the job, but it's really struggling with having that confidence that I'm here. Now what? Can I really do this job? I'm dealing with all of these other challenges, but I'm really struggling with myself because I realize that I'm the first doing this. And then to go back to the beginning of our conversation, making sure that I don't fail. Because I want to make sure that Judge McCullough can come to me and say, Craig, nicely done, right? One of the greatest compliments I ever received was the late Judge Charles V. Johnson coming to me and saying, Craig, thank you for what you're doing. And I basically, I approve and bless what you're doing, and I'm proud of you. But there's pressure in getting to that point. And for me, it was really struggling with, can I do this job that I'm the first at doing? Because there was no blueprint that was given to me that I could look to where I can confirm I will be successful. So that's my immediate response to that question, adopting what Nick said as part of my response as well.
And while in my position, I'm definitely not the first, but there've been very few of us. Only thing I would add, I have so many stories over the course of my career that I could share with you. But what I would say about what you need to have in place is a strong support system, because you need it. I mean, so much happens to us during the course of the day, all day long. You really need a strong support system to go to vent, to get advice, to pull you off the ledge. You know, I've had that and I've been that for people. So it's going to come. It's there. I don't think it's going to go away. Get a strong support system to help you navigate.
Thank you all. We have just two more. This is also for the panel, to the extent that you can comment. Do you have any favorites among those being suggested as possible candidates for Judge Biden's pick for the Supreme Court?
I don't have any particular favorites.
I don't either.
I think all the names we've heard about are all tremendous. You just look at their resumes. But in addition to the increased racial and ethnic diversity that we're seeing in these nominees and also other appointments, the professional diversity, I think, is also very vital. So I look to people that have non-traditional backgrounds or underrepresented backgrounds in their careers too. And so I know there are people who are coming from being criminal defense lawyers that I think would be excellent, or have other unique or underrepresented professional backgrounds. That would be my preference. But the president didn't ask me, so I'll just keep it to this group.
Thank you. And this last question is for you, actually, Mr. Brown. So it's my understanding you were on Survivor. Are there any, if that's accurate, are there any transferable skills that you've used from your time in Survivor in your current role now? If so, what are they?
Yes, that's accurate. It was 21 years ago. So I would only say that that prepared me a little bit for being in a public position. At the time, Survivor was the #1 or #2 most watched show in America. And so you get used to people pointing and whispering and asking questions and reading about yourself in the paper and that kind of thing. So it's not a skill set, but it got me a little bit used to being out in front and in public. I was hoping I'd make it through a full hour without somebody bringing that up, but it's all right.
I'm sorry, we weren't
okay.
the ones. We weren't the ones. And I'm sure you, Mr. Sims, and of course, Judge Crawford-Willis have been survivors and have stories that you could tell as well. I want to turn it over to Judge McCullough to do our closing. But before I do, I want to thank each of you for taking the time out during the noon hour to bless us with your presence, with your insight, inspiring us. So thank you all so much. I'm going to give you a clap so you can hear us, but hopefully everyone else can give you a muted clap. I'm going to turn it over to Judge McCullough, who I'm blocking. You always say that you want to put me out in front, so this is that wish coming true. So I'll move it over for you, Judge McCullough.
Thank you very much. Tamara, great job, wonderful job. Thank you, Naja, for just moving us through this excellent, extraordinary program. I join Naja and Tamara in thanking our panelists and all of you, Amy, that contributed in any way to making this such an extraordinary event. Jay, we can always count on her for some extraordinary poetry, and of course, Christine, you have some vocals that we expect to be shared on the national stage at some point. So we don't have a lot of time left, but all of you who are on the call, who are on the Zoom, thank you so much for participating. It looks like there's 75 participants. This is wonderful. This is our Black History Month celebration, but I would remind everybody that just like when you have a birthday, that's that special day to celebrate you, but you're special for the entire year. So our Black history goes on and on and on every day of the year. We will remember that, and we certainly will remember this program. The question that I've been directed by Naja Bullock to pose to you is this: where do we go from here? We've had our hour-long celebration. We've reminded each other of this excellence by way of our panel. Where do we go from here? There are a couple of next steps, and I'll share those quickly. February the 23rd, Sisters Who Care. They have a newsletter or an entry that they provide every Wednesday, I believe it is. Mm-hmm. And I would direct your attention to that. Sisters Who Care, we appreciate you. On the 28th of February, there will be a newsletter that Tamara and Naja and I and some others will work to share with you that will have a summary of some local and national events concerning some opportunities that you have to go further and deeper into the subject of African American history. We would invite you, if you haven't been to the Northwest African American Museum, to think about it. We would invite you to go to some of the other museums and to support African and African American businesses. We would invite you to examine your own workspace and to be an active ally in this issue on the topic of supporting all of the community members who need that support. Finally, as it pertains to excellence, what this panel has shown us is what excellence is personified. We do want to remind each other that excellence doesn't mean that the people who deserve the support have to be perfect. One of the things that we have found, and Craig, you know this very well, when there is a problem with an individual, and Nick as well as Judge Crawford-Willis, sometimes there's something called character assassination. And the person who is the suspect or the victim sometimes is often maligned because that person perhaps did not go to Harvard or did not go to Yale or did not go to the University of Washington or Seattle U. But that person deserves our respect. And part of our excellence means making sure that all of those individuals in the justice system, in the court, and the libraries and the school systems get that respect. So with that, I want to thank you. And as you are heading finally to these different organizations and to these different venues, I want you to remember to use your GPS if you can't find it. Why do I say that? I do that as a nod to Dr. Gladys West, an African-American woman who was the inventor of GPS technology. With that, thank you. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you back here this time next year.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.